I wanted to talk today a little bit about maybe something that I think is in some ways there's a bit of in the current zeitgeist of Buddhist and meditative discussion. There's in my opinion, I think there's maybe a bit of a confusion around it, and that's this distinction between what is actually awakening and awareness. But like before I get into this, this distinction about the difference between awakening and awareness, sort of want to set it up by telling a bit of a story from the Buddhist canon, and it's from this sutta. It's from this sutta called the Kemaka Sutta, and Kemaka was what was called like a non-returner, what we call an anagami. And an anagami is somebody they've reached like the third level of enlightenment, but they're not really an arahant yet. They haven't achieved full awakening yet. Now, so the way this sutta starts off is that, obviously in the time of the Buddha, there was no way just to like email somebody and ask them a question. There's no way to jump on Discord and just ask a question of somebody, or jump on a Zoom and ask somebody. There wasn't even letter writing at that time. So if you wanted to ask a question of somebody, you had to go actually to this person. And so there was one like group of elder bhikkhus. Who basically they wanted to ask Kemaka, the elder Kemaka, they wanted to ask him a question. And so they had to send like a messenger to go and ask him the question. And what they sent this messenger off, and to ask him that, because Kemaka seemed like he held a certain kind of position that they didn't quite understand. And they basically said, well, we've heard that you, Venerable Elder Kemaka, that you hold this position that obviously the Buddha said that there's no self in any of the five aggregates of clinging. There's no self in form, feeling, perception, mental activities or consciousness. And you yourself, Kemaka, have said that you don't regard any of these aggregates as self or belonging to self. But yet you say, Kemaka, that there is a notion that I am exists, and this I am has not yet vanished with respect to the aggregates. But again, you also don't regard any of them as I am either, individually as I am, I should say. Sorry. And so they sent this like messenger off to ask Venerable Kemaka about this, and he said, "Yep, that's what I said. That's basically what I said. Yep, that's correctly interpreting me." So the messenger had to go back. And so this whole like group of elders again is like, oh, okay, right, okay, so you've said that. So they want to now ask a follow-up question to this. And again, this messenger has to go back and forth and ask these questions. They basically asked the messenger to ask him, it's like, well, so what do you exactly mean by this sense of I am? Do you mean form as I am? Do you mean feeling as I am? Do you mean perception as I am? Do you mean mental activity as I am? Or do you mean consciousness as I am? Or do you see that the I am is apart from these things? And so when Kemaka was asked this question, he's like, couldn't be bothered like back and forthing this. This is insane. I'm gonna grab my stuff and I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna talk to these elder monks about this and see if we can get some clarity here. And in some way, that's in some way what I wanted to do today. I wanted to grab my little stick. I'm going to go off and let's see if we can get some sort of clarity around this, because I think this is a pretty large contention and maybe confusion. Because what we find in a lot of the discourse today is this really, really common view that these advanced states of meditation, they're basically experienced by a knower. They're experienced by a witness. They're experienced by awareness itself, or this kind of pure awareness. And in my view, I actually think this is a mistaken view of what Nibbana actually is. I think this is a mistaken view of what awakening actually is. So while these kinds of states, they might be very, very deep and very, very profound, from a Theravada Buddhist perspective, this isn't really what Nibbana is. This isn't really what awakening is, because at least the way I see it is like I actually still see that these kinds of states still have a subtle kind of identification with experience. There's a self behind or behind that is aware of all these things. This is subtle. This is very, very subtle sense of I am or I am not experience. So, and I think this subtle sense of, and maybe it's a deep-seated something that's very hard to discern. This sense of I am or I am not is basically identifying with one's conscious experience. And so, again, from the Theravada perspective, from Theravada Buddhist perspective, we wouldn't say that knower, that witnesser, that pure awareness, that, essentially what is a term that's thrown around quite a lot these days is a state of non-duality, a sense of non-dual awareness. We actually wouldn't say that actually is awakening. We would just say that this is a transient kind of state, because there's still this sense of I am or I am not within that state. And I'll get to why. We sort of from a Theravada perspective, we would say no. Actually, there's still a kind of conceit there, and by conceit I mean in the terms of mana. And mana is a kind of a conceit that I am or I am not. Not a conceit in the terms of I'm arrogant. I'm a megalomaniac. I'm wanting to rule the free world kind of thing. It's not that kind of conceit. It's a very, very different kind of deep-seated conceit of I am. So, but the way we have to understand this, we sort of also have to understand what the Buddhist conceptualization of what the self is and what it stands in opposition to as well. So, the classical Buddhist interpretation of not self, arose in, and the interpretation of the self, it arose in kind of dialogue, but also in tension against the view that was sort of currently held in India at that time, that you find in the Upanishads, of this kind of central essence, this kind of this Atman, that this Atman was this permanent, indivisible, unified, immutable self that seems to underlie all experience, and it was a kind of metaphysical reality, and that this Atman was this thing that moved about through different births. In the Upanishads, they basically call the Atman, they call it the eternal witness. So it's something that witnesses everything. It's this agent behind all actions. It's this subject, essentially this great big subject that is the instigator of all kind of moral responsibility. And so what they say that the Atman is, they always say it's the known. It's always the knower. It's never the known. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It's always this thing that knows. So this is what they conceptualize as the Atman. Now, this is something that is basically like a metaphysical constant, as I said. And if anybody's read, this is, it's a fantastic book, Nisargadatta's book of I Am That. If anybody's read that, hasn't read it, please go and read it. It's a phenomenal book. But he speaks of the that still is. And again, this is the Atman. This is this kind of, a non-dual presence that is there, that is still there. It's a phenomenal kinds of things. But so you have to understand that the Buddhist conceptualization of the self and not self arose in opposition to that, in tension to that. What we say is that the Buddha actually went a little bit further, and he basically said that there is something beyond that. There's something, Nibbana is something that is beyond that. And so in the way that Nibbana is sort of conceptualized, and the way that it's talked about, and the way the awakened state of Nibbana is that in that state, all forms, and you can't even really call it a state, but I'll just call it a state just for ease of terminology. In that state, all forms of self-conceit are totally eradicated. So all forms of mana, what we would call mana, any kind of self-conceit, it's totally eradicated. And so any kind of reflexive, any kind of innate kind of feeling of I am or I am not, that's totally eradicated from experience. And this eradication comes about because one has broken through what we call avidya. And avidya is obviously, it's commonly translated as delusion. My kind of interpretation of what avidya is, it's this kind of fundamental misrepresentation that consciousness itself has a core, has this kind of center, or has this kind of ground zero. Because that is abandoned, then any kind of sense of I am is gone from that experience. So it's this, avidya is this fundamental misperception that consciousness itself has an owner. It's this assumption that there is this kind of distinct core subject, some enduring kind of subject, some enduring kind of, even further than that, an enduring essence that is within conscious experience. It's this kind of self who has a center, this center of the thing. It's this kind of ground zero of where everything is. If one can uproot that, this is the uprooting of avidya. And so if one can uproot mana and one can uproot avidya, this whole kind of self-illusion, this whole kind of misattributed framework of what we are, like all of this collapses, and any experience of a self within or even behind experience, all that is dissolved. And what this disillusion does, it dissolves this whole experience of what an Atman would be. This whole experience of this Witna, this knower, this kind of this agent, is all of this fades away in the full state of Nibbana. So likewise, even the Buddha also talks about this, and this is again, I love this kind of like philosophy stuff, but it's like the Buddha also talks about any kind of experience or non-experience fades away. Any kind of existence and non-existence, you can't say that it's either one of those two things. That's a nice thing from the Sutta Nipata. And even the process of, the process of being, or what we call bhava, being and becoming, that is eradicated. All that is gone. Any kind of sense of being is gone. So this is how, we would sort of understand what the fully awakened state actually is. It doesn't have any of that residual I am there or I am not there. I am experience or I am not experience. Any kind of notion of experience or non-experience, existence or non-existence, all that's dissolved. And so where I think we get attention in the current, as I said again, in the current kind of zeitgeist of the way that maybe we think about awakening and these kinds of very, very deep states of meditation, is that actually getting to this state that Theravada is talking about, of a complete abandonment, a kind of radical abandonment of all identification and attachment, is something that's probably, one, conceptually it's quite hard to wrap your head around, and two, it's also something that is not easy to do, because we're always sort of, if we have avidya where we have a fundamental misrepresentation of what reality actually is, so we're always sort of being deceived by it. So it's this kind of radical abandonment of all identification to a unique conscious experience, whether it's anything formed or formless, anything mental, anything conceptual, it's all abandoned. So even in these when we talk about different levels of enlightenment, one of the first fetters that we break through is one of the fetters of what we call Sakkaya Ditthi, and that's this identification with a self, or an identification with the aggregates. So even if you've broken through and seen that, or even if you've experienced this kind of non-duality or this kind of non-duality, non-dual awareness or something like that, you can still start to subtly attach to experience itself. So when the mind lets go of, psychophysical phenomena, essentially the aggregates, if it lets go of that, even at a deeper level, it still starts to attach to something, the thing that remains. There's still a kind of attachment there. There's still a kind of identification there. So the mind would subtly become attached to this non-dual or non-dual awareness itself. The mind subtly becomes attached to awareness itself, or this knowing itself, or even a state of this temporary liberation itself. And so it's really grasps at these last remaining things. All those other things have been let go of. Again, the aggregates have been let go of, but it attaches to something else. So what happens, and this is what I think now, what I think happens in this state, if we experience this sense of, awareness itself, what actually happens is we become, awakening, or this aware state becomes reified as an object. So we take awakening, or we take awareness itself as an actual object. We think we're perceiving it as not an object, but what we're doing is we're reifying it as an object. If there's an object in experience, there has to be a dualistic pole of a subject within that, even though experientially it might not feel like they're the subject, because one is attaching to experience itself. So there's this tendency to identify with experience itself. So even this subtle state of there is just this, even that becomes grasped at and identified with, because it is experience. So this is where we now sort of get back to Kemika from the start of the story. So he arrives, and again, just to reiterate, he arrives, and he basically said, yeah, that's the position that I have. I don't identify as any aggregate that I am, nor do I say that that I am exists apart from the aggregate. But still, and again, remember, he's a non-returner, he's an anagami. Still, the notion of I am remains. But he doesn't fix it onto anything. And so the simile that Kemika gives at that time, he gives a simile of a lotus, like a lotus flower. He basically said that the scent from a lotus flower, it can't be found, it can't be attributed to, it can't be represented in the petals or in the stalk, in the flower, in the pips of the lotus. But nonetheless, it belongs to the flower itself. It belongs to the essence of what a flower is itself. So likewise, he says, this sense of I am, it still is something that lingers there. It's not the flower, it's not the stalk, it's not the pips, it's not any of those things, but that scent still, that scent of I am still lingers. It still lingers as a kind of residual process that is still within experience. And so he goes on to say that even, a noble disciple that has abandoned these lower fetters, again, Sakaya Ditti, Vicikicca, Silabata Paramasa, all these lower fetters have been abandoned. There still remains this residual conceit, I am. So again, what remains is mana, this residual conceit of I am or I am not. What remains is a residual desire, I am. And what a residual desire I am is this sense of any kind of desire for formlessness, or what we call arupa rago. So anything that's even formless, that is still desired for, that is still attached to. And there's also the desire, actually the thing that is desire itself, this kind of restlessness, urucheka, that still remains there. So even the desire I am still remains there. And obviously he says, even that underlying tendency, avidya itself, even that sense of I am, that still remains there. So even though all these other things are gone, that sense of I am still remains. he basically said that these things are still not yet uprooted. So I still have a sense of I am. So even all those other things have been let go of. He still has this sense of I am there. And so what do we do at this point? You know, look, you know, it's a while off for us. So, you know, we probably don't have to worry about this today. Hopefully, maybe somebody has to worry about it today, which would be good. That'd be nice if somebody has to worry about this, but it might be a little far off from us. But either way, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with this subtle kind of sense of being the owner of a unique conscious experience? That even that subtle sense, even when we've dissolved everything else. This is where basically the Buddha said we have to apply this reflection of anatta to everything, to absolutely everything, to experience itself. You have to apply it to the knower. You have to apply it to awareness. You have to apply it to pure awareness. You have to apply it to the witness of experience, this kind of agent, this kind of feeling of an ontological primacy of consciousness itself. You have to apply not self to that as well. You have to apply this perception of not self to awakening and the insights that come about it and the path itself. One has to have this kind of radical perception of not self towards everything within experience. And it's only through this kind of radical perception of not self to actually everything in experience, all those kind of final, minute, subtle vestiges of the ego actually start to vanish at that point. Any feeling of I in the I am disappears. If we can do this, there's a collapse of our whole ontology about what reality actually is. And within that becomes a kind of existential freedom that comes with that. Any experience of either existence or non-existence, or any experience of anything like that, all that actually starts to dissolve. Any experience, non-experience, existence, non-experience, those dual poles, they all dissolve. So the mind stops interpreting everything, it stops interpreting this unique conscious experience as primary. All the primacy of consciousness is dissolved, it goes away at that point. Instead, all the mind actually sees at this time, all that is known is the arising and passing of dukkha. Any kind of self-referential framing, all that is gone. It's just arising and passing of dukkha. And so any kind of sense of even the unconditioned, it's not identified with in any way. And so what this does is releases this notion of am. If one isn't taking consciousness as ontologically primary, if one isn't taking experience itself as being a unique conscious experience, the experience of am in I am, all that's gone. So this is what Kamaka basically says for us to do. He basically says to practice, we have to keep practicing and contemplating. All the aggregates, any kind of experience that we have is just something that's arising and ceasing, something that is just basically dukkha arising and passing away. And he basically said through that, any kind of residual conceit, any kind of residual mana, any kind of residual avidya, any kind of residual arupa rago of attachment to any kind of formlessness, all that will actually disappear. And he gave the analogy of like a soiled cloth. He said, basically, even if you take a cloth or you take a shirt or something like that and you wash it very well, you wash it with salt and lye, obviously you'd wash it with detergent and all these kinds of things today. Even if you wash a cloth very, very well, it might still have a kind of residual scent there. There might still be a tiny bit of, it might smell just a tiny bit. But if you take this shirt that's basically clean and you throw it in this like larger hamper of a scented hamper, that residual smell dissolves into something larger. So similarly, he basically says final purification requires this sustained contemplation of that there is no I am in experience, or there is no I am not in experience. So with that, any traces of the self disappear, any kind of owning conscious experience, all that disappears. And so if we can sort of reach this state, it really does have these kinds of phenomenological and epistemic like implications for this. You know, we might think if we don't identify with any kind of I am that we wouldn't be able to function. But basically the Buddha says, like, even once these kind of ontological primacy points, they are dissolved, they're still functioning there. You know, we can still function. We can still function as a, you know, the aggregates still go on, but one doesn't really identify with them anymore. Any kind of question of a kind of ontological primacy of consciousness, like all that dissolves, all that, you know, this idea of does the self exist or does the self not exist, that dissolves it. It's irrelevant at that point. Any kind of fear of annihilation or any kind of fear of existential loss, all that is dissolved again, because experience and non-experience, existence and non-existence, all of that is dissolved. Any kind of mana, any kind of framing of I am or I am not, all that's dissolved. So what remains is this kind of, you could say, you know, stability of knowing that, you know, really it's just all it is a dukkha that's arising, that's arising and passing. But there's no longer any kind of sense of selfhood, any kind of sense of attachment to anything within that unique conscious experience. There's a kind of selfless clarity there. There's a kind of, but there's still, you know, psychophysical coherence within that, but there's a total absence of any identification with any kind of unique conscious experience. So just to kind of wrap this up, you know, this idea that the full awakening state is this kind of back and forth between I can just be awareness itself, or I can drop into a non-dual state itself, or I can drop into the knower itself, but then I sort of go back and forth between these kinds of things. From, you know, again, from this Theravadan perspective, we would say, you know, that's actually not it. And, you know, the kind of analogy for that, it's like a prisoner. It's like a prisoner that's in jail. A prisoner that's in jail can get like let out into the yard, and they can think for a moment, oh, I'm free of jail, but they've got to go back in. Likewise, a prisoner can go out for the day, maybe do some community service or something, but they're still incarcerated. They still have to go back into jail. So they're not fully free at that time. Even though they might feel like they're momentarily free, they're not really free. So these kinds of interpretations that I'm the witness, I'm awareness itself, anything like that, it's a kind of temporary freedom. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a very good thing to have, but I basically think I think it's still not really what, you know, from the Theravada perspective, what we're talking about. Again, like the prisoner, they might think they're free just because they go outside, but, you know, if they really do think they're free, they're actually deluded. You know, they're still incarcerated. So this kind of taking this kind of safe haven in awareness, I think it's a useful tool, but even awareness itself has to be perceived as being empty of anything. So when there's nothing more that's clung to, no I or mine, not even in these kind of very, very subtle kind of states, this is where, you know, what we would say would be like true liberation from this Theravada perspective, this Nibbana from this Theravada perspective. So again, most people today think about like witnessing, knowing, you know, pure awareness, non-duality, all these kinds of things. They point to that, saying that basically that this is the goal. But if we sort of take this other perspective, we basically would say that the Dhamma is something that goes beyond this. Nibbana is something that goes beyond this. So, you know, like chemicals, flower fragrance, any sense of I am within that is still like pervading in even something like a purified mind. If we have that, even though it seems like I've let go of all these things, but something still pervades there. There's something in there. But again, if we get back to Kemika, when he said of like, even like a clean shirt though that's thrown into this hamper that is sweet smelling, any kind of residual smell, all that dissolves into the oil. So this kind of purification it's something that does not point to any kind of self in any kind of way. The deepest insight comes from no longer identifying I am or I am not. And so that's all I want to say today. You've probably got a lot of questions now, so yeah, we can open it up to questions.
Okay, so questions first of all from the floor.
Thank you, Ajahn Sādaro, for a very interesting talk. I find that, as we are still in this human form, it might be very difficult to achieve that.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, like, the more advanced monks and everything, they have already said you could achieve a bit of that maybe in nimitta or jhanas or something, but maybe you have some advice for people, because we are still in this body that we kind of have to see through the body and the five senses, and even if we try to shut everything out, I mean, it's very difficult. Maybe you have some advice. Thank you.
No, you're 100% right that it's difficult. It's full nibbana, becoming an arahat is difficult. It's like if it was easy, everybody would do it. So obviously, it's the things that I've been talking about here today. I'm not sort of saying that they're easy to do and they're fully accessible and you're going to be able to do it like tomorrow kind of thing. It's obviously not. And so what it was is just sort of trying to get some kind of clarity around that. So even sort of these ideas that these very advanced states are the end goal. It's just trying to get a little bit of clarity there to say, actually, from this Theravada perspective, actually, that's not the end goal. We would think it might look like the end goal. And as you said, there's maybe somebody that says like nimittas are a glimpse of that. Again, it might be moving towards that thing, but it's not the thing in itself, not the thing that we're actually talking about. So even something that appears like the thing is not the thing. So, and again, but there's nothing wrong with that. Getting the thing that appears like the thing is still pretty good. Like, that's still fantastic. Like, if you can do that, that's great. It's sort of like going, well, I won $1 billion. I won $1 billion, but I didn't win like $20 billion. You still got $1 billion. You're still doing pretty well if you can do these kinds of things. So, to now basically answer your question is that, okay, we're in the world. We still have avidya. We still have mana within us. We still have this conceit. We still have fundamental misrepresentation of ontologically the way that things are. We still have these kinds of things, but the experiences that we might have on the way to that, it's encouraging. We are moving towards that thing. It's something that we can actually work towards. And if we have these kinds of experiences, it shows us that we're on the right track. It shows us that we're moving towards this thing. I think, and what I think it shows us as well is that, you can look at somebody, again, like Kemika. This is an anagami. This is somebody that's like right up there. He still has a kind of humility. He still has a kind of, epistemic humility about his own state. It's like, I've let go of everything, but like there's still an I am there. So even if we again, in our just generally daily practice, we have a good meditation set, it's like, everything sort of dissolves. Or I get some kind of peace. It's like, okay, this is great. I'm on the right path. but it's not it. I have to keep progressing. I have to keep moving. I have to keep trying to practice. So I think, we can sort of take from this not a kind of like, well, that's way off in the distance. This is way off this is something that I'll never get or whatever. It's like, it's possible because you're experiencing things that are taking you towards that thing. You're experiencing some of these things that are putting you on the path towards that thing. You might not be there yet, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But that you are basically on the path and you're moving towards it. Does that make sense? Cool. No problem.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah.
This question for online sort of ties in with that. So do we continue to practice right view of non-self in daily life and in meditation?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just going to interpret the question that a right view of non-self would entail something along the lines of that there is no self within the aggregates, that there is no sense of self within experience. You could say even maybe like a deeper view of what not self is what I was maybe talking about there, is that there is no fundamental mana within experience. There's no kind of conceit of I am or I am not within experience. Can we reflect on that? Can we reflect on that in our daily practice and in our daily experiences? Like, yeah, for sure. You definitely can, and I'd probably encourage you to do that. And this, again, this is what sort of Kemika says to do in that sutta. Kemika basically says we have to keep looking at the aggregates, looking at every aspect of our psychophysical experience as something that is arising and passing away, as something that is not self. So it's good if we take this perception and reflection of not self to everything within our experience. Now from a very kind of pragmatic, that's a kind of deeper reflection on the way things could be. Now from a very pragmatic and practical perspective, it's like it is something we have to be sort of cautious of as well. We don't want this to veer in a kind of way where we're going, well, everything's no self, there's no I am, there's no I am not, so therefore I should, nothing really actually matters, or we have this kind of experience of a kind of dissociation with the world and dissociation with our experience. If it's moving in those kinds of ways, something's sort of going wrong. We still have to develop other aspects of the path. Having this kind of insight into not self and having a kind of right view into not self within every aspect of our experience. This is important. This is really, really important. But so are other aspects of the path as well. So is sila, so is dana, so is generosity, so is actually developing samadhi as well, actually developing like the calm and stability of the mind, so you can actually see things that are not self from a stable and firm kind of perspective, as opposed to this kind of thinking about it and just getting confused about it and all these things. So yeah, you definitely should take on this kind of right view of not self with everything in experience, but don't forget all the other aspects of the path that are there as well. They're equally as important.
Okay.
Right on.
Hey. Thank you for your talk.
That's fine.
Mine might start off as a reflection and statement. Perhaps there might be a question in it.
Cool.
So apologies if it's not a question
That's
that
fine.
you're looking for. Yesterday we were sitting in the book club with Citizen, and
nice.
we had the Dhammapada out.
Yep.
And we were discussing the first couple of paragraphs about the mind being a forerunner. Yep. And I can get, or I'm settled with the idea that the mind being a conceptualizer and something beyond the experience of the mind isn't a concept you can hold. So it becomes sort of the nothing space, the emptiness space, the deathless space, or nibbana. But I sometimes wonder whether coming at it from this perspective, and especially being a beginner, whether it can fall into that sort of more dissociative look at experience, rather than understanding it's just an aspect that's being discussed. For example, sitting in meditation and expecting that, you don't feel anything, or you don't see anything, or you can't taste, or you can't hear. My understanding so far of it has been that you require all these elements to be present to begin with, to be able to identify those different aspects of your experience. And as you're evaluating those, you see that as they arise and they fall away, there is no space in that experience for this self. And that is the inside of it. And it's a funny one, because now I look back on it from when I first started meditating or thinking about this subject. It seems like right view wasn't something I started with. But as I was practicing, it became evident I didn't have right view. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a really good, really good reflection that sort of like turns into something that is quite important. Is that you sort of ended it off by saying it's like I thought I had right view, but as I've practiced further, like it becomes clear that I actually don't have that. I don't have that thing. And so there is this kind of progression that we have to go through in our practice where things become a little bit more clearer, and in some way this is what I was just speaking about as well, as like sometimes it can go wrong. Sometimes we can grasp something again, like this, like metaphysically, this is a very, very difficult concept to grasp, and it could just be like a metaphysical interpretation of this thing of there is no I am, there is no I am not. It can be very difficult to actually grasp this thing, and so sometimes we actually might grasp that in the wrong way. Might grasp both those things in the wrong way, and this is sort of again. This is how we, when our practice progresses, we sort of maybe see, I was grasping that thing the wrong way. It becomes clearer as I go on. And so I think, there is that element. It's like where for me, it's a very, very important thing to have within your practice is epistemic humility about what I know and what I don't know. That goes for the multitudes of things out in the world, but it also goes for my own experience. It goes for my own sense of awareness and experience of everything. It's like, I don't know it at its deepest level yet. So I have to keep sort of searching for this. And sometimes, look, there's been plenty, just numerous times where I've got it wrong. I've practiced for like a couple of decades now. I've got it wrong so many times. I'm still probably getting it wrong now. But it's this kind of constant practice that we need to go through of like, maybe I'm getting it a little bit wrong now, but okay, can I open up and can I actually like see something deeper within this thing? And obviously talking to others helps. Talking to Kalyana Mittas helps. Talking to other practitioners helps. It's like, well, I think this thing is like this, but is it meant to be like this? Well, somebody maybe has a different interpretation. Good teachers are very, very, very useful to have. So, there's always the possibility that we grab it the wrong way, and like it's actually, I'd probably say, it's sort of built into the structure that you will grasp it in the wrong way because you still have avidya. You're gonna get it wrong, but it's this. The more we practice with this thing, hopefully, the clearer and clearer it gets, the more right view becomes stronger within oneself. Does that sort of speak to that in some way?
Thank you, Ajahn. Combining two questions online on day-to-day practice of non-self, let's say. So, so how do we continue to practice a right view of non-self in daily life and in meditation?
Didn't we just ask that?
Sorry, and then combine that with, can you please explain a few tools of how to, he mentions, get rid of myself, but
okay. Well, so the first thing, like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, you know, don't go, just gotta get rid of the self, you know. So it's this is actually where it can things can go wrong sometimes. So the idea we need to like totally throw the self out. You don't want to go that far down the rabbit hole yet. Again, this is what I was talking about today, especially was these kind of very, very deep final sort of parts of the practice of like, so it's not like we have to throw absolutely everything out right now. There's different conceptualizations about this, the path towards this. Some people say, yeah, we should be maybe reflecting on everything as not self all the time. That's one way that some people talk about it. Other people talk about it in a way it's like we have to build the right kind of qualities within the self to be able to let those go. So we need to build like the qualities of jhana, we need to build the qualities of metta, we need to build the qualities of panya within a kind of self to be able to let the self go properly. So there's, you know, there's these kind of two different tracks that you can take, and I think what is the kind of the litmus test of whatever works for you the best is it leading to more skillful states of mind? If it's not, if one is looking at everything as not self, but a lot of unskillful states are coming up of, again, unskillful states are coming up of things like, again, like nothing matters, like it doesn't matter if I talk to people or I don't talk to people, doesn't matter if I do or I don't do, none of this actually matters, so hey, I just won't engage with the world, or I won't, you know, do any of these kinds of things. If one is engaging with not self, and those are the unskillful things that are coming out of it, that tactic is, you know, there's something going wrong there. Likewise, if one is sort of building the right kind of qualities of the self to be able to let go of the self, if one is doing that, and it's, again, if it's building some sort of unskillful qualities or characteristics within the mind of like, oh, look at me, I've got jhana, aren't I better than everybody else? And, you know, my meditation is so much better. Aren't I the most kind? Aren't I the most compassionate? Aren't I the most, you know, all these kinds of things. If it's going in these kinds of ways, it's going in an unskillful way. So I think it's something that we always have to, you know, modulate between and just sort of know when are more skillful states arising and how do we make more skillful states arise, when are unskillful states are arising, and if they're arising, can we abandon them? So I think any kind of reflection that you're sort of making, that you know, that parts of your experience, they're not personal. Like I see the camera now, I see the light. You know, I can always go, well, this isn't a personal thing that's happening to me. It's this is just experience. You know, the pain that I have in a lower back, it's like, it's not a personal thing. It's just a pain that's sort of in experience. There's many different ways we can go about looking at non-self or not self within our experience. It's just, we have to, I think it's actually something we have to continue to look into and be flexible towards, because if I just go, well, there's no self in the aggregates, great, okay, fine, that's all well and good, but like if I now sort of get stuck on that, I don't progress. So this being open and flexible and looking at one's experience in these many different kinds of ways that are sort of moving towards non-self, I think we have to do that, because that, I think for me, you know, this is again just my perspective, this is the thing that keeps us progressing. So there's no like one way to do it.
When the Buddha got enlightened, what he said was the first noble truth,
Yep.
dukkha.
Yep.
So he said, I'm here to teach you to get rid of dukkha, the end of dukkha. So all what he did was that,
Yep.
to tell everybody.
Yep.
Take the second noble truth, the cause of dukkha,
Yep.
the desire and hatred and delusion. So to desire, there should be somebody there to desire. There's something, and there's somebody desire. So straight away, it is very clear. This dukkha, the first noble truth, dukkha. Second noble truth proves that it is because there's somebody else to desire. If there's no person to desire, there is no dukkha. So he says that when you look at, interact with anything, there should not be any separation between what is seen and observed and what is observed. So remove the duality straight away. So, and that happens when you think, as even the modern philosophers like the French philosopher in the 16th century, Descartes, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So when you think only, you see that's a personality. That is the thinker is an unenlightened being. Okay. So once as you develop in the Noble Eightfold Path, this particular way of seeing gradually disappears. By practicing constantly, seeing everything as a processes and phenomena, not as things. I mean, when you go to quantum physics, also it's all movement of particles and waves. You see. So Buddha was saying that don't think as materials. It is all what you are experiencing is movement. So that is the scientific view of what's happening now. And Buddha probably knew that at the time, but he didn't want to give a lecture on quantum physics to people at the time. So he just said that there's nothing there. And we know that in physics today, it's all movement of particles. And if you, they say if you observe, if you look at something, only you see the particle, but if you don't look away, there's nothing. So I think it is modern science is revealing what Buddha was trying to say from the very beginning, this referring to process and phenomena. We can get this end of the view of self is the nibbana at the end, that's suffering. That's a gradual path in the practice. That's why he has given this Noble Eightfold Path. So gradual practice, mindfulness, basically loving kindness and mindfulness. You gradually see the loving kindness brings oneness. There's no separation. That is the beginning of Metta Sutta. When you practice loving kindness, it is you are reducing the separation. Everybody is the same. So that's the starting point. And there are various ways of looking at it. So then mindfulness of the mind is going, what is going wrong here? I think that is what all Buddha's teaching is all about. Start from the view of self. Only get the self, then you are separate, you are out of suffering. That's what I should say.
No, you got some like good observations there, and there is that kind of idea that and I think in many sort of places that's all, like the Buddha said, like that's all. If one is in nibbana, all one experiences is dukkha arising and passing. There's no kind of identification with the dukkha that's arising and passing. And again, dukkha arising and passing is essentially phenomena. Any phenomena that's arising and passing. So I think there's that kind of reflection that it's just phenomena that's arising and passing. And then when we think of sort of like the Descartian, I think therefore I am. Again, I think you're right. There's this kind of, again, this is what I was sort of getting at, this kind of witness of experiences. I experience, therefore I know I exist. And I think that's what this, if one can uproot mana, it gets rid of the I think, therefore I am. It's just, it is just the experience. So seeing things as just processes of arising and passing away, I think this is, again, a very good, you rightly pointed out, like there's a path towards these things. And if we can sort of get on the path, develop these different kinds of qualities of metta and samadhi and all these things, this is going to help us see this in a more in a clearer kind of way. Because these kinds of modalities of being, it's a very deep kind of thing, but we have to sort of progress towards it. So yeah, definitely, I'm in agreement. Yeah.
I think Max had a question.
Yeah, I had a question on the other religions like Christianity, Jewish, and Islam.
Yep.
Okay, a lot of them, they say, go to church, or go to the masjid, or go to the mosque, right, or the temple.
Yep.
So is that a time where when they pray, is that the leaving of self to pray to? And I'd like to know what you think. What is God in all this? What you talked about.
Yep.
How does God figure in it?
Yeah.
It's kind of a simplistic question, but I just want to ask.
Yeah, it's an easy one. What is God? No, it's so what I'll say here, it's just my opinion. And this literally is just my opinion. I can't really say I'm sort of representing Buddhism as a whole. I can't really say I'm representing any of those other theistic religions' interpretation of what God is. This is literally just my interpretation of what it is. But so you ask the question is if these people that believe in a theistic being are praying to them, and at that time there's a kind of letting go. There's a letting go of one's own ego and merging with the divine. I know a lot of sort of Jewish Kabbalic practices which are phenomenal in this kind of way, where it's like even when one is in the world and doing things in the world, one merges with the one and does these things. So is that a letting go of the kind of self? I'd say in some way, yeah. I'd probably say in some way there's a letting go of at least the kind of conception that I am separate from experience, that I am separate from something that is bigger than me and unified in this kind of way. So a certain kind of self-referential processing in that time would probably be let go of. Now it hits to the bigger question of what is God? Well, what is actually God in this kind of thing? And look, this is something, as I said, this is just my opinion. And my opinion is I don't really know. I don't really know what God is. A lot of people have different interpretations of what God actually is. So in some way you could say it is everything and nothing in itself, because so many different people have different interpretations. This idea that is the all, that it is any of these kinds of things. I could probably say something a little bit more to the, as I said, what I said at the start of the talk about the idea of the Atman in the Upanishads. That is this kind of merging with the kind of universal, merging with the kind of universal consciousness in this kind of way. I think there's these kinds of states that can be accessed, and I think in some ways what you might get is individuals that either have that kind of experience, and it's like, well, this is God. Likewise, I think you could probably have Buddhist meditators that have this experience and go, well, this is non-duality. This is the Arupa jhanas or something like this. Potentially it could be very, very similar. There's actually one thing that is really nice. There's some work by the one nice thing about the kind of pluralism that we have now in society and in science and all these kinds of things is a lot of people are trying to draw connections between the similarities between, as opposed to the differences between what is God, what is not God, what is deep meditation, what is anything else. A lot of people trying to draw a lot of similarities there. And from people, say, for example, like Andrew Newberg, David Yarden, Thomas Metzinger is doing some really nice work on what are the kind of commonalities of some of these experiences. And a lot of the times they'll say these experiences have that sense of unity within them. So across cultures, across beliefs, across different meditative techniques and styles and all these kinds of things, there is this kind of sense of unity that's there. There's a sense of clarity that's there, that like this is the most real thing that is available. So there's a lot of similarities over the different religions, over the different meditative traditions, over the different meditative styles that many people can sort of have that are like very, very similar. So if you want to say God is that similarity, yeah, you can say God is that similarity. There's, conceptually, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But again, I actually don't know what God is. All I can sort of state with a bit of certainty is the understanding that I have from this Buddhist perspective or even that sort of unified experience. There is no I am. There is no I am not in that. And so that potentially conceptually looks like something different, as opposed to that I am merged with the one in that kind of a, again, doesn't answer the question. And there's this, people have been debating this for a couple of millennia. So unfortunately I couldn't nail it in 5 minutes. So yeah.
Okay, so we don't have anything else online. I have one more question, or else it's time for announcements. Okay, we're all left to ponder the big mysteries then. And then, so back to the mundane.
That's what we're gonna muck through.
Okay, so thank you, Ajahn. Okay, lots. I could say lots to think about. There are things we've pondered. As you say, all of us, or the whole humanity's pondered some of these questions for a few millennia. So anyway. All right. Okay, so a couple of blatant plugs to start with. First of all, it's the end of the financial year. So we do encourage people, if you think you'd like to support us, it's a good time to do it. We are still looking at reducing our internal loan for the SOS Retreat Centre. So there's a link in the newsletter, and that was wrong. It seems it's not working correctly. So that will correct it the next time around, but the bsv.net.au/pave the path is the link that will work. Oh, I haven't got that yet. It looks different. Okay. Speak to Sridhar, he'll fill you in. He's a technology person, well, amongst others.
If the link doesn't work, put hyphens in it.
Okay. The other, as I said, some self-promotion, some plugs. We are encouraging people, because it's a good thing to do if you can. Self-retreat over Easter. So, over Vasa rather. Sorry, the last time I was up at SOS was Easter time. So embracing the tradition of the Vasa. So we'll be entering, the Sangha will be entering into the Vasa in a few weeks' time. So encouraging people to think about whether they might like to spend a week or some of or all of that time, the 3 months, to commit to deeper practice up at SOS. It is a nice environment. So Newbury might be cool in winter, but the retreat centre is fantastic. So we encourage you to think about that. And on a similar line, Ajahn Brahmali's Sutta retreats and the talks from that, they're now available on Podbean. Am I going to try this? It's https:// you know the thing, bsv.podbean.com/. So if you'd like to catch up with Ajahn Brahmali's suttas, they're really worth listening to. Okay, the more normal announcements now. SOS retreats, we have one last retreat before the Vasa starts. So that's Ajahn Sādaro on the 4th to the 6th of July at SOS. And the title that is given that retreat is our meditation palette, knowing what the mind needs. So the bookings for that are now open. Then the week's teaching program ahead tomorrow night will again be Ajahn Sādaro, I think, is it? On Tuesday night we'll have the layperson-led meditation retreat. Monday to Thursday nights we have, at 7 p.m, we have Make Meditation a Healthy Habit. So that's a 20-minute monastic-led, twice a week, guided meditation. In the mornings we have New Day, New Mind, so you can join any time on Discord between 4 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. The Sunday Dhamma talk next week will be led by Aya Upeka, who will obviously be coming down from Newbury, and she will also be taking the Monday night meditation. So I think that's all we've got, other than to welcome everyone to come and take part in the Pindapata and the shared dana. And with that, we can formally close.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good. So we'll pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha now. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Soakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Okay, see you all across there for some lunch. Hey, Don. Yeah, for sure.